everyone, I'm Becky. Welcome to Between World. I often say this, experiencing life is not only about exploring business, it's also about exploring life itself, and at a deeper level, human nature. Today I want to talk about a topic that every one of us deals with every single day, communication. Especially if you work in international or cross-border business. Like I do, communication becomes even more complex. We're constantly working with overseas clients and partners across different cultures, habits, and ways of thinking. Whether it's through spoken language, body language, emails, or messages. Communication is present in almost every moment of our lives. Over the years, I've had a lot of personal experience with communication, especially in business. And to be honest, I've fallen into quite a few traps along the way. But every mistake is also a learning opportunity. Very often, we feel that the message we've sent out has been understood. We assume the other person has got it and will act accordingly. But when we later check the results, we realize that the behavior and the outcome are very different from what we expected. In the workplace, misunderstandings caused by unclear communication, missing context, or incomplete information are everywhere. These misunderstandings lead to conflict, internal friction, and emotional drain, and they quietly increase a company's operating costs. I used to tell my team this all the time. Communication is the most hidden cost in business, and often the most expensive one. Salaries are visible. Fees paid to partners are visible, but the time wasted correcting misunderstandings, redoing work, or repairing relationships. That's where the real cost lies. Another common situation is this. We send out a task or a message, and then we have to keep pushing and pushing before we get any feedback. A few years ago, Thomas Lane once shared something that really stayed with me. He said that in professional management environments, proactive feedback is a very rare and valuable ability. And in recent years, I felt this more strongly than ever. We all want people around us to give proactive feedback. It gives us a sense of certainty. We know things are moving forward. We know they're under control. But in reality, this is not a common habit in most workplaces, even though it's extremely important. Another big challenge, especially for CEOs and managers, is this: when we give instructions or requirements, the reality our colleagues or team members face during execution can be very different from what we imagined. And this creates a hidden risk. So today, I want to share a few reflections from different angles. First, let's talk about how to communicate more efficiently in a business environment. Thomas Lane often describes communication as a four-step process: send, receive, understand, and act. Let's break this down. First, we need to make sure that what we send is actually what the other person receives. Then we need to check whether they've really understood it. And finally, we need to see whether their actions match what we originally expected. This morning, I had a very simple but very typical example with my colleague Ella. I asked Ella to help prepare an invoice for a client. To avoid any misunderstanding, I called her and said, "Ella, can you take a notebook and write this down as we speak?" This might sound like a small thing, but it's actually very important. When we communicate verbally, we often assume the other person understands us exactly the way we mean it. But their situation, their context, or even their mental focus might be very different from ours. So the first step was, write it down. The second step was, after I explained everything, I asked Ella to send the information back to me in a draft, so I could check whether she'd received and understood it correctly. Only after that would she prepare the invoice. That's the action step. About 20 minutes later, Ella sent me the invoice draft. Most of it was correct, but there was one small detail. I had told her that we were sending 2 trucks, each costing 1,600 euros in transport fees from the Netherlands to France. She had written this down, but on the invoice, only one transport fee appeared. This is a very typical example of where the understand step didn't fully happen. This is something I talk about a lot with my team. If someone only receives information without understanding the business logic behind it, the communication cost becomes very high. Why? Because without understanding the logic, people can only follow instructions mechanically. They can't adapt. They can't extrapolate, and they can't apply the information flexibly in real business situations. That's why I try not only to explain what needs to be done, but also why I'm asking for it and what the broader context is. This helps people truly understand, not just hear the information. Ella is not a new colleague, and we've worked together for a while, but if someone hasn't fully stepped into the business context, it's very easy to only grasp the surface level message. This happens even with very experienced colleagues from time to time. That's why aligning on context is so important. Now let's talk about action. If something is misunderstood early on, the deeper the execution goes, the higher the cost becomes. That's what we mean when we say execution is heading in the wrong direction. One thing I've noticed is that many people rarely double-check before taking action. Especially team members may worry that repeatedly confirming details will make them look unprofessional or not capable. My experience is the complete opposite. I genuinely appreciate people who double-check before acting. To me, that's a sign of responsibility and reliability. It saves time for everyone involved. One of our Dutch partners, Rapid, has a project leader working with us on our France project. Working with him gives me a strong sense of security. Before executing any plan, even small details, he always checks with me. Becky, just to confirm, is my understanding aligned with what you meant? That level of rigor builds trust. I know that once things are confirmed, execution will be accurate and consistent. So no matter how urgent things feel, send, receive, understand, act really matters. Skipping any step will almost always cost more time later. The second point I want to talk about is proactive feedback. As I mentioned earlier, proactive feedback is still quite rare in the workplace. In recent years, I've become much more aware of this, partly because I work closely with many Dutch colleagues who tend to communicate more directly, and partly because our team is small and efficiency really matters. Without proactive feedback, communication costs quickly turn into time costs. So I consciously remind my team and myself to build this habit. At a personal level, it's about awareness. At an organizational level, it requires systems. The simplest tool we use is the calendar. For example, if I assign a task to my assistant Miro that will happen 4 weeks later, I make sure we set clear check-in points. I ask her to block my calendar at 2 or 3 milestones and give me updates proactively. The calendar itself becomes a reminder. Without it, we often only realize something has gone off track when it's already too late. As managers, we actually carry more responsibility for outcomes than our team members. Complaining or pushing without systems doesn't change results. What really helps is creating mechanisms that encourage or even force proactive behavior. When tasks and ideas are taken out of our heads and placed into reliable systems, like calendars or tools we trust, our minds become much lighter. In the long run, proactive feedback becomes much easier when a company has mature processes. When systems run smoothly, each role naturally pushes the next. Even those who fall behind are brought back into rhythm through the structure itself. Different companies and different stages need different approaches. But at the core, proactive feedback is essential for visibility, control, and execution. On a personal level, proactive feedback also improves relationships. Communication is never one-sided. We are constantly switching between sender and receiver. When we send messages, we hope for feedback. So when we receive messages, offering proactive feedback creates smoother, more trusting communication, not just at work, but in life as well. We often say we like proactive people. But someone has to be proactive first. Are we willing to be that person? In Chinese culture, there's a saying, you give me 1 inch, I give you a mile. But someone has to give that first inch. I hope that in communication, we can all take one small step forward. Proactive feedback changes the energy of communication, and over time, it changes relationships. Finally, I want to touch briefly on CEOs and leaders. Giving tasks, instructions, and requirements is also a form of communication. But there's one question we must always ask ourselves: are the tasks we give actually realistic and feasible? When leaders understand frontline business scenarios, even if they're not doing the execution themselves, they're far more likely to give effective instructions. But when leaders become disconnected from day-to-day operations, their directions often become misaligned. No matter how hard the team works, the desired results may never happen, and this creates frustration, misunderstanding, and internal conflict. I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years, and honestly, I've made many mistakes as a CEO. I've learned a lot along the way. Today, I won't go deeper into this topic, but in a future episode, I can share more specifically how to give instructions that truly work. If that's something you'd like to hear, your feedback really motivates me to continue sharing. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who might find it useful. See you next time.